July 5, 1943. Germany commits 2,700 tanks and assault guns to Operation Citadel, the assault on the Kursk salient. It represents the largest concentration of armor in German military history. The new Panther and Tiger tanks are supposed to guarantee victory. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein promises Hitler a decisive breakthrough that will destroy Soviet forces and restore German initiative on the Eastern Front. Within 18 days, Germany loses approximately 760 tanks destroyed or damaged beyond immediate repair. Another 200 to 300 suffer significant damage. The offensive achieves nothing. The tanks are never replaced. Germany enters permanent strategic decline from this moment forward. The tragedy is that everyone knows the attack is doomed before it begins. Soviet intelligence discovers German plans months in advance. The Red Army constructs the most heavily defended position in human history, 8 successive defensive lines stretching 120 miles deep, containing 20,000 artillery pieces, 6,000 anti-tank guns, and 1.3 million mines. German officers see reconnaissance photos showing endless fortifications and beg Hitler to cancel the operation. Hitler hesitates, delays, then orders the attack anyway. What follows is not a battle, but an organized massacre of German armor, the deliberate waste of irreplaceable tanks, crews, and Germany's last hope of victory in the East. This is the story of how 1,000 German tanks die in a battle their commanders know they cannot win. The Kursk salient emerges from the spring 1943 campaigns as a massive Soviet-held bulge jutting 120 miles into German lines. The salient measures 250 miles across at its base and protrudes westward like a giant thumb. German strategic planners see an obvious target. Simultaneous attacks from north and south will pincer off the salient, encircling hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops. Field Marshal von Manstein, commanding Army Group South, proposes the operation to Hitler in mid-March 1943. The plan appears sound on paper: cut off the salient, destroy the trapped Soviet forces, shorten German defensive lines by 350 miles, and potentially exploit the breakthrough to threaten Moscow again. Hitler approves planning for Operation Citadel. German intelligence initially estimates approximately 500,000 Soviet troops occupy the salient with perhaps 1,200 tanks. These numbers seem manageable. Germany can concentrate overwhelming force at 2 narrow breakthrough points, rupture Soviet lines, then race toward the meeting point at Kursk City. Colonel General Walter Model's 9th Army will attack from the north with 900 tanks. General Hermann Hother's 4th Panzer Army will strike from the south with 1,200 tanks. Total German strength for Citadel, approximately 780,000 soldiers, 2,700 tanks and assault guns, 10,000 artillery pieces, and 1,800 aircraft. This represents half of Germany's entire Eastern Front tank force committed to a single operation. If Citadel succeeds, Germany regains strategic initiative. If it fails, Germany lacks reserves to stop Soviet counter-offensives. The plan begins unraveling before the attack launches. In March 1943, Hitler visits the Panther tank production facility and becomes obsessed with waiting for the new tanks. The Panther mounts a powerful 75mm high-velocity gun and thick-sloped armor theoretically superior to any Soviet tank. Hitler delays Citadel from April to May to receive more Panthers. Then he delays again to June. then to July. Each postponement gives the Soviets more time to prepare defenses. German commanders protest vehemently. Model warns that delays allow Soviet reinforcement and fortification. Manstein argues that surprise is lost and German advantages evaporate with each passing week. General Heinz Guderian, Inspector General of Panzer Troops, tells Hitler directly on May 4, the Panther is not ready for combat. Its mechanical reliability is terrible. We will lose more tanks to breakdowns than to enemy fire. Hitler dismisses these concerns. Germany will attack with overwhelming technical superiority once enough new tanks arrive. Soviet intelligence penetrates German planning at the highest levels. The Lucy spy ring, Soviet agents working in Switzerland with access to German communications, provides Moscow with detailed information about Citadel in April 1943. Additional intelligence comes from the Red Orchestra network inside Germany and from the British Ultra program, which shares selected decrypts with Moscow. By late April, Soviet commanders know the approximate date, locations, and strength of the German attack. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, Stalin's most trusted military advisor, recommends an unprecedented defensive strategy: deliberately absorb the German assault in prepared positions, bleed German armor through attrition, then launch massive counteroffensives once German strength is exhausted. This represents a complete reversal of previous Soviet tactics that emphasized immediate counterattacks. The Soviets transformed the Kursk salient into history's most formidable defensive position. Approximately 300,000 civilians work alongside soldiers to dig 5,000 miles of trenches, construct 686 miles of anti-tank ditches, and lay 503,000 anti-tank mines and 439,000 anti-personnel mines. The defensive system consists of 8 successive defensive belts, each 3-6 miles deep, creating a defensive zone 120 miles from front to rear. Every village becomes a strong point. Every hill receives artillery positions. Every approach route is covered by interlocking fields of fire. Soviet engineers calculate precise killing zones where German tanks will face concentrated anti-tank fire from multiple directions. The numbers are staggering: 20,000 artillery pieces, 6,000 anti-tank guns, 920 Katyusha rocket launchers, all positioned to destroy German armor in carefully prepared engagement zones. Marshal Konstantin Rokossovsky, commanding the Central Front-facing model's northern attack, later states, "We knew everything, where they would attack, when they would attack, with what forces. We prepared accordingly." But here's the critical question that German commanders should have asked and didn't: even if Citadel succeeds in cutting off the salient, what then? Germany lacks strategic reserves to exploit any breakthrough. The Wehrmacht has no operational plan beyond the initial encirclement. Soviet forces continue growing stronger. Soviet tank production reaches 2,000 units per month versus Germany's 500. The correlation of forces shifts irreversibly against Germany regardless of Kursk's outcome. Guderian argues precisely this point in meetings throughout May and June: every tank we lose at Kursk is irreplaceable. The Soviets can replace their losses. We cannot. This operation risks our entire panzer force for no strategic gain. But Hitler, supported by Manstein's optimism, orders the operation forward. The date is set, July 5, 1943. The German armored force, the finest tank army ever assembled, prepares to attack the most heavily defended position on Earth. The offensive begins at 3 a.m. on July 5, 1943. With a massive German artillery bombardment. Model's 9th Army in the north attacks with 900 tanks across a 25-mile front. Soviet defenders respond with devastating accuracy. Pre-registered Soviet artillery catches German assault formations in the open. Anti-tank guns positioned in camouflaged positions engage at ranges under 500 yards, close enough to penetrate even Tiger armor. German tanks strike the first defensive belt and immediately encounter minefields that channel them into pre-planned killing zones. Within the first 6 hours, Model's Northern Force loses 100 tanks without penetrating beyond the first Soviet defensive line. Guderian's prophecy about the Panther proves accurate. Of the 200 Panthers committed to Citadel, 160 suffer mechanical breakdowns before even reaching combat. Transmission failures, engine fires, and suspension problems cripple Germany's supposed wonder weapon. Manstein's southern attack with Hother's 4th Panzer Army achieves better initial progress. The southern force concentrates 1,200 tanks, including 102 Tiger IS and 200 Panthers, on a narrow 30-mile sector. German armor smashes through the first 2 Soviet defensive belts on July 5 to 6, advancing approximately 15 miles. Soviet defenders conduct fighting withdrawals to successive prepared positions, bleeding German armor at every stage. The SS Panzer Corps, consisting of the Leibstandard, Das Reich, and Totenkopf divisions, leads the assault with 390 tanks. These elite formations advance steadily southward, losing approximately 30 to 40 tanks daily to Soviet anti-tank defenses. The critical engagement zone approaches Prokhorovka, a small town where the terrain funnels German armor into a restricted approach corridor. Soviet intelligence identifies this as the decisive point and rushes the 5th Guards Tank Army, 850 TV-34 tanks under Lieutenant General Pavel Rotmistrov, to meet the German advance. The Battle of Prokhorovka begins at dawn on July 12, 1943. It becomes the largest tank engagement in history, approximately 800 German tanks and assault guns versus 850 Soviet tanks battling across an 8-square-mile area. Soviet tactics are suicidal, but effective. Rotmistrov orders his T-34s to charge directly at German formations at maximum speed, closing to point-blank range where German tanks' superior guns and armor provide no advantage. The T-34s deliberately accept catastrophic losses to neutralize German technological superiority. At ranges under 200 yards, the T-34's 76mm gun can penetrate Tiger armor, and the Tiger's famous 88mm gun loses its standoff advantage. The battlefield becomes a swirling melee of burning tanks, colliding vehicles, and close-range slaughter. The casualty figures for Prokhorovka remain disputed by historians. But the tactical outcome is clear. Soviet forces lose approximately 300 to 400 tanks destroyed on July 12. German forces lose 40 to 80 tanks destroyed. The mathematics appear to favor Germany. Soviet losses exceed German losses by a factor of 5 to 1. But the strategic calculation tells a different story. The Soviets can replace 300 tanks in 2 weeks from current production. Germany requires 3 months to replace 50 tanks. More critically, the German offensive achieves no breakthrough. Soviet defensive lines hold. The 5th Guards Tank Army, despite horrific losses, prevents German exploitation toward Kursk. Manstein spearheads advance to within 25 miles of Kursk city, then stop, unable to penetrate further. The German armor is burning its strength against Soviet defenses that absorb losses and maintain coherence. Model's Northern Force fares even worse. By July 10, the 9th Army advances barely 10 miles. After 5 days of continuous assault, German tanks attack repeatedly against Soviet positions at Ponary, a critical railway junction, and suffer unsustainable casualties. Soviet defenders employ massed anti-tank guns in battalion-strength concentrations. German tankers describe attacks where 30 to 40 anti-tank guns open fire simultaneously from camouflaged positions. The Tiger tanks, impervious to most Soviet tank guns, prove vulnerable to the 76 mm anti-tank gun at close range and catastrophically vulnerable to the 85 mm anti-aircraft gun deployed in ground role. Model loses 200 tanks by July 10 without achieving any significant penetration. His offensive strength is exhausted. He reports to Hitler, continuation of the attack will result in complete destruction of the 9th Army's Panzer Force with no prospect of breakthrough. But what the Germans are about to discover makes this disaster even worse. Soviet intelligence has prepared not just defensive operations, but massive counter-offensives. On July 12, the same day as Prokhorovka, Soviet forces launch Operation Kutuzov against the German Ural salient north of Kursk. 11 Soviet armies, 1.3 million soldiers and 2,400 tanks attack Model's rear positions and supply lines. The 9th Army, already weakened by Citadel losses, faces catastrophic encirclement. Hitler receives reports of the Soviet Ural offensive on July 13. Simultaneously, Allied forces land in Sicily on July 10, creating a crisis in the Mediterranean. Hitler summons Manstein and Kluge to his headquarters on July 13 and announces, Operation Citadel is terminated. Model's forces will withdraw to meet the Soviet Ural offensive. Manstein's forces will prepare for defensive operations. Just 8 days after beginning, Germany's last major Eastern Front offensive ends in failure. Manstein protests bitterly. His forces stand 25 miles from Kursk. He argues that 4 more days of attacks will achieve breakthrough and encirclement of Soviet forces in the salient. Hitler refuses. The strategic situation has shifted. The Ural offensive threatens Army Group Center. The Italian crisis demands German reinforcements. German tank losses at Kursk already approach 400 destroyed or damaged beyond quick repair. Manstein's request for more time reveals the fundamental flaw in German planning. The operation has no endpoint, no clear objective beyond keep attacking until something breaks. German commanders measure success in miles advance rather than strategic objectives achieved. The reality is that even if German forces capture Kursk city, Soviet reserves prevent exploitation. And German losses render the Wehrmacht incapable of defensive operations elsewhere. The tank losses accelerate during the withdrawal. Soviet aviation attacks German columns as they retreat. Soviet tank brigades harass German rear guards. German units abandon damaged tanks that could be repaired with more time they don't have. The Panthers, still plagued by mechanical problems, break down in large numbers during the retreat. Of the 200 Panthers committed to Citadel, fewer than 40 remain operational by July 20. The Tiger losses are more sustainable in absolute numbers. Approximately 70 of 147 Tigers are destroyed or damaged beyond field repair. But each Tiger represents enormous production resources that Germany cannot replace. A single Tiger requires 300,000 man-hours to build. The Tiger battalions lose 7 months of production in 2 weeks of combat. German commanders recognize the catastrophe. Colonel General Heinz Guderian tours the Kursk battlefields on July 21 and sees destroyed German tanks scattered across the landscape. His report to Hitler on July 23 states bluntly, the armored force has suffered irreparable damage. We committed our best divisions and finest equipment to an operation that was doomed from the start. Soviet defenses were impregnable. Our intelligence failed completely. The decision to proceed with Citadel despite clear evidence of Soviet preparation was a fundamental strategic error. Hitler responds by forbidding further large-scale offensive operations on the Eastern Front. From July 1943 forward, the Wehrmacht fights a defensive war against a Soviet enemy growing stronger daily. Narration: the final casualty accounting for Operation Citadel reveals the catastrophic scope of German losses. Official German records, compiled by Franz Halder's staff in August 1943. Document 760 tanks and assault guns destroyed or damaged beyond immediate repair between July 5 and July 23. Additional reports indicate another 200 to 300 tanks suffering significant damage requiring depot-level repairs. Total German tank casualties approach 1,000 vehicles, representing 37% of the committed force and 20% of Germany's entire Eastern Front tank strength. These numbers do not include the mechanical failures. The Panther battalions lose 160 of 200 tanks to transmission failures, engine fires, and suspension breakdowns, most never repaired because spare parts don't exist. The effective loss of German tank strength exceeds 1,100 vehicles. Soviet casualties vastly exceed German losses in absolute numbers, approximately 1,600 tanks destroyed and 3,000 damaged according to Soviet post-war records. Soviet personnel casualties reach 178,000 killed. Missing, or captured plus 330,000 wounded. German personnel losses are relatively modest. 54,000 killed. Missing, or captured plus 137,000 wounded. The casualty exchange ratios appear favorable to Germany. But these numbers disguise the strategic reality. Soviet tank production for July 1943 alone reaches 2,200 units, enough to replace Kursk losses in 3 weeks. German tank production for July 1943 reaches 500 units, requiring 2 months to replace Kursk losses. The personnel story is identical. Soviet mobilization brings 500,000 new conscripts monthly to the front. German manpower is exhausted. The Wehrmacht cannot replace losses at anywhere near Soviet rates. The psychological impact on German soldiers exceeds the material losses. Panzer crews who survived previous campaigns, Poland, France, the early Eastern Front victories, experienced their first taste of genuine defeat. Obersturmführer Rudolf von Ribbentrop, commanding a Tiger company in the Leibstandard Division, writes in his memoir, "We went into Kursk believing we were invincible. The new Tigers and Panthers were supposed to make us unstoppable. Instead, we attacked into a meat grinder that chewed up tanks like a machine. Every day we lost comrades, lost tanks, gained nothing. When the order came to withdraw, I felt only relief. We had accomplished nothing except losing friends for no purpose." This sense of futility spreads throughout the German officer corps. The certainty of ultimate victory that sustained German soldiers through 1941 - 1942 evaporates at Kursk. Specific unit experiences illustrate the waste. The 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich begins Citadel with 145 tanks. By July 17, the division reports 42 operational tanks remaining, a loss rate of 71% in 12 days. The Großdeutschland Panzer Grenadier Division starts with 200 tanks including a full battalion of Panthers. By July 20, the division has 35 operational tanks, the Panther battalion is effectively destroyed through combat losses and mechanical failures. The 3rd Panzer Division, part of Model's Northern Force, loses 90 of 120 tanks in the first week of combat. These elite formations require months to rebuild, and during those months, Soviet forces maintain relentless offensive pressure elsewhere on the front. The strategic situation deteriorates across the entire Eastern Front. Soviet Operation Kutuzov, launched on July 12 against the Ural salient, forces German withdrawal from positions held since 1941. Soviet Operation Polkovodets-Rumiantsev begins on August 3, targeting German positions around Kharkov, Ukraine's 4th largest city. German forces, weakened by Kursk losses and lacking mobile reserves, cannot hold Kharkov, captured by Germany in October 1941, and recaptured from the Soviets in March 1943. After heavy fighting, falls to Soviet forces on August 23, 1943. The symbolic loss is enormous. Hitler personally ordered Kharkov held at all costs. The Wehrmacht retreats across a 1,200-mile front throughout August and September. By October 1943, Soviet forces reach the Dnieper River, crossing into western Ukraine. Field Marshal von Manstein attempts desperate counterattacks in August to stabilize the front. He lacks tanks. The mobile warfare that characterized German operations for 3 years becomes impossible when Germany cannot concentrate armored reserves. Soviet forces, now outnumbering Germans 3:1 in tanks and 2:1 in infantry at key sectors, achieve breakthrough after breakthrough. Manstein's tactical skill prevents complete collapse. But strategic defeat is inevitable. The correlation of forces shifts monthly in Soviet favor. By November 1943, Soviet forces outnumber German forces 5-1 in tanks along the southern sector, a ratio that makes German defensive operations almost impossible. The personal fate of German commanders involved in Citadel reflects the operation's failure. Hitler never forgives Manstein for the defeat, despite Manstein's arguments that more time would have produced victory. Their relationship deteriorates through late 1943. Hitler relieves Manstein of command in March 1944. Field Marshal von Kluge, commanding Army Group Center during Citadel, commits suicide in August 1944. After the catastrophic German defeat in Operation Bagration, Colonel General Model survives longer, conducting skilled defensive operations through 1944, but commits suicide in April 1945. When surrounded in the Ruhr pocket, General Hoth is relieved of command in November 1943. After further defeats in Ukraine, the cursed generation of German commanders either dies, is dismissed, or presides over Germany's collapse. The most haunting aspect of Kursk is that German intelligence provides accurate warnings that are ignored. The Abwehr, German military intelligence, reports in June 1943 that Soviet forces in the Kursk salient substantially exceed initial estimates. Reconnaissance photos show extensive fortifications. Captured Soviet soldiers reveal knowledge of German attack plans. Colonel Reinhard Gehlen, Chief of Foreign Armies East, German intelligence analyzing the Soviet Union, submits a report on June 20 stating, Soviet forces in the Kursk salient number at least 1.3 million soldiers with 3,000 tanks. Defensive preparations are unprecedented. Captured maps show 8 successive defensive lines. Assessment: attack into Kursk will result in catastrophic German casualties with minimal probability of breakthrough. Hitler receives this report and orders the attack anyway. The decision to proceed despite clear intelligence of Soviet preparation represents one of the war's most inexplicable choices. The strategic consequences of Kursk ripple across the entire war. Germany permanently loses offensive capability on the Eastern Front. Every subsequent German operation, from Manstein's brilliant backhand blow at Kharkov in November 1943, to Model's tactical counterattacks in 1944, represents defensive fighting, temporary stabilization, or local counterstrokes. Germany never again initiates a major strategic offensive in the East. The Red Army dictates the war's tempo from July 1943 until Berlin's fall in May 1945. Historian John Erickson states in The Road to Berlin, Kursk was the Rubicon. After this battle, the Wehrmacht could only retreat, delay, and die. The initiative passed irrevocably to Soviet forces who never surrendered it. The tank losses specifically crippled German operational planning. Pre-Kursk, German panzer divisions maintain an average strength of 120 to 150 tanks. Post-Kursk, the average drops to 60 to 80 tanks and never recovers. German armored divisions in 1944 1945 are panzer divisions in name only, often containing 30 to 40 tanks supplemented by assault guns and anti-tank weapons. The Tigers and Panthers that survived Kursk are distributed in small independent battalions rather than concentrated in divisions, reflecting Germany's inability to replace losses and maintain full-strength formations. Soviet tank forces grow exponentially. By January 1944, the Red Army fields 5,800 tanks on the Eastern Front versus Germany's 2,300. The 2.5 to 1 Soviet advantage in armor enables operational-level breakthroughs that Germany cannot contain. The human losses prove equally irreplaceable. German panzer crews require 18 to 24 months of training to achieve proficiency. The veteran crews lost at Kursk, men with 2 to 3 years of combat experience, cannot be replaced with the same quality. New crews receive 6 months of training before frontline deployment. The experience differential shows in combat effectiveness. Veteran German panzer units in 1941 1942 achieved kill ratios of 5 to 1 or higher against Soviet tanks. By 1944, newly formed panzer units achieve parity at best. Soviet crews, benefiting from combat experience and improved training, narrow the quality gap steadily throughout. 1943 1945. The elite panzer divisions that led Germany's victories in 1939 1942 are shadows of their former capability by 1944. Historical debate centers on whether Kursk was inevitable or represented an avoidable disaster. Historian Dennis Showalter argues in Hitler's Panzers that Germany had no good options by summer 1943. Attacking at Kursk risked catastrophic losses, but remaining passive invited Soviet offensives that Germany lacked resources to counter. The alternative scenario that haunts analysis is what happens if Germany never launches Citadel. Hypothetically, if Germany maintains a defensive posture in July 1943, Soviet offensives still occur, but strike against prepared German positions with intact panzer reserves for counterattacks. The 1,000 tanks wasted at Kursk remain available for mobile defense elsewhere. Field Marshal von Manstein argues precisely this point: after the war, we should have allowed the Soviets to attack, then destroyed their offensive forces through counterstrokes. Attacking at Kursk with the enemy fully prepared was operational madness. Alternative historians suggest that cancelling Citadel might have delayed Soviet victory by months or even a year. With 1,000 additional tanks available for defensive operations, Germany potentially holds the Dnieper River line through winter. 1943. 1944. This delays Soviet liberation of Ukraine, Belarus, and Poland. However, strategic trends favor Soviet victory regardless of Kursk's outcome. Soviet industrial production vastly exceeds German capacity. Soviet factories produce 24,000 tanks in 1943 versus Germany's 12,000, including assault guns. Soviet manpower mobilization brings 3 million soldiers annually to the front versus Germany's 1 million. The material correlation of forces ensures Soviet victory even without Kursk. Historian David Glantz concludes, Kursk accelerated the inevitable. Germany was losing the war through attrition. Kursk merely ensured the process occurred in 1944. 1945. Rather than 1945. 1946. The lessons learned from Kursk influence Cold War military doctrine profoundly. NATO planners studying hypothetical Warsaw Pact offensives into Western Europe recognize that prepared defensive positions with adequate anti-tank weapons can shred attacking armor even when the attacker possesses local superiority. Soviet military theorists develop concepts of deep operations and echelon defense based on Kursk's success. The U.S. Army's airland battle doctrine of the 1980s explicitly draws on Kursk's lesson that layered defenses in depth can defeat concentrated armored offensives. Modern military academies teach Kursk as definitive proof that intelligence preparation, defensive fortification, and mass attrition can neutralize technological superiority. German officers' post-war assessments of Kursk are uniformly negative. Guderian, who opposed the operation from the start, writes in his memoir Panzer Leader, "Citadel was a complete and utter waste of our last armored reserves. We threw away tanks we could not replace for no strategic gain whatsoever. It was the turning point where we lost the war in the East beyond any hope of recovery." Manstein, who supported Citadel, never admits complete error, but concedes in his memoir Lost Victories, the operation was launched too late and with insufficient surprise. Had we attacked in April as I originally proposed, success was possible. By July, the opportunity had passed. Model, the most cautious of the commanders, concludes simply, we attacked the strongest fortress in history with inadequate forces. The outcome was predetermined. Remember July 5, 1943. The day Germany committed 2,700 tanks to Operation Citadel, attacking the most heavily fortified position in military history against an enemy that knew every detail of German plans. 18 days later, approximately 1,000 German tanks are destroyed, damaged beyond repair, or lost to mechanical failure that cannot be remedied. The offensive achieves no strategic objectives. No encirclement occurs. No breakthrough materializes. The Soviet Union does not collapse. Instead, the Red Army absorbs the German assault, bleeds German armor through attrition, then launches counteroffensives that drive the Wehrmacht 400 miles westward by year's end. Kursk represents the moment when Germany's defeat in the East becomes mathematically certain, when tank losses exceed production. When personnel casualties exceed replacements, when operational capability degrades beyond recovery. The final accounting reveals the full scope of waste. Operation Citadel costs Germany 760 tanks destroyed, 200 to 300 heavily damaged, and 200 plus lost to mechanical failure, total effective loss of 1,100 to 1,200 armored vehicles. These losses require 8 to 10 months of production to replace at. 1943. Output levels. Germany never has 8 to 10 months of peace to rebuild. Soviet forces attack continuously from August 1943 through May 1945. The Panzer divisions never recover their pre-Kursk strength. Historians universally agree that Kursk marks the permanent shift of initiative to the Soviet Union. David Glantz, the preeminent Western historian of the Eastern Front, states in Kursk, the greatest tank battle, after Kursk, the only question was when Germany would lose the war, not if. The Germans threw away their last mobile reserves on an operation that could not succeed even if it succeeded tactically. The paradox is perfect. Even German victory at Kursk leads to German defeat because the losses required for victory exceed Germany's ability to replace them. Today, the Prokhorovka battlefield hosts a massive memorial, a steel sculpture shaped like a tank tower rising 270 feet, visible for miles across the flat steppe. The memorial honors both Soviet defenders and acknowledges the battle's historical significance. Every July 12, Russian veterans and historians gather to remember the largest tank battle in history. The lesson taught to Russian military cadets is simple: proper preparation, defensive depth, and willingness to accept casualties can defeat any attacker, no matter how technologically superior. The lesson German military academies teach is equally simple: never attack prepared defenses without clear intelligence, adequate reserves, and realistic objectives. Kursk stands as permanent proof that courage, advanced technology, and tactical skill cannot overcome strategic stupidity. When you waste 1,000 tanks on a battle you cannot win, no amount of bravery saves you from the mathematics of defeat.